to episode 2 of season 2 of The Pastor
and the Professor G. Joyner.
We are so glad to have you here. It is about to be some real talk, some real action, and it's sure enough going to be real righteous.
It's righteous talk, real people. Topic of the day: the inspiration and the idolatry of Dr. King and President Obama. Where do we go from here? Once again, we're glad to be back live from New South Memphis, LeMoyne-Owen College. Crowd full of people, that's a good thing, and we have some esteemed colleagues and parental unit as guests today. And I guess we can start off. We'll start. I'll introduce a couple, and you jump in, or you guys can introduce yourself. But I got to introduce the first person at least.
You do, and you can introduce the majority of them.
I'm lazy. First and foremost, we have Dr. Zandria Robinson, University of Memphis. Sociology professor, writer, author, thinker, mama, afro wearer, putting in work. Once again, you guys saw her in season 1, so she's back at us. We have Dr. Charles, a.k.a. Chuck, a Buck McKinney of Earle, director of African and African American Studies, writer as well, Duke alumnus, Morehouse alumnus, father, husband, brilliant man. Next, we have from the University of Memphis, soon to be, is it ABD, I think? ABD, all but doctorate. We got Giovanni Dortch, G.O.D., writer, thinker, scholar as well. She's also a return guest, and I guess it's women's studies and sociology, is it? That is her specification. And then last but not least, we have, y'all got to give it up real quick before I even start talking. Give it up. This is the man that is responsible for all the good things about me.
Okay. Well said. Well said.
All the bad things, we're going to blame it on Mom. Anybody with you, but edit that, John. Edit that out. We got my dad is a South Memphis veteran. That's where the bloodline runs. Lauderdale, Parkway, Latham, Lauderdale sub. Vietnam vet, entrepreneur, husband of 47, 48 years. 44. I gave you too many years.
He said don't give him no more.
Too many. Entrepreneur, accountant, and like I said, everything that I do positive, at least all of it comes from him. So I'm glad to have him here today. This is a special episode for me. So we can get down to business, rock and roll.
I also want to acknowledge the student audience. We have some students from Lemoyne. We have some local artists. We have some administrators, some financiers. We have a very well-rounded crowd, so give yourselves a hand. And we're glad to be here representing at the 2013 LeMoyne-Owen College Homecoming. And so we do want to get right into it, and we encourage everybody, if you have any questions for us, meet us on Facebook at The Pastor and the Professor, or you can join us for a tweet chat, a live tweet chat using the hashtag PastorProfessor2013. So we are going to get right into it, and we want to talk a lot about this whole notion of who Obama is and is becoming, and who Dr. King and his legacy is and is becoming. I want to go first to the elder statesman of the group, Pop Joyner. One of the things that we think you bring to the table is some firsthand experience of living through some time with Dr. King, living through the assassination thereof, and then this whole Obama ascendancy. Can you tell us anything about how you see the world from the vantage point of a Vietnam vet who has seen the likes of Dr. King and Obama?
Okay, let me start off with this. When my oldest daughter started college, she was studying Black history and African studies, and every day she would come back and tell me what she studied. And I would always have to remind her that, look, it didn't excite me like it excited her. And I would always have to remind her, I lived that.
Right.
You reading about it, but I lived it. And what I lived, most of it is not in the book. All right. One of the things you got to look at it, I say you always have to take this from a balanced approach, the civil rights movement from a balanced approach. I look at it like a war. The general and the private in the infantry have two different perspectives of the war. When I was in Vietnam, the general didn't have to deal with ticks, mosquitoes, snakes, vipers. He wasn't in the swamps. The general wasn't there. He didn't have to worry about his boots rotting out and trying to get some new boots or patch those boots up until he could get some more. I take the same what line of thinking with the civil rights movement. Most of your leaders, the way the media projects it today is that one person, Dr. King, was the civil rights movement, and he was not. What about the infantry in the movement? First of all, we have many more leaders. You have Whitney Young, Adam Clayton Powell Jr., Roy Wilkins. You have a variety of leaders in the movement. But I think we need to teach our young folk more about the ground troops, the infantry, so to speak, the grunts. That's what we used to call the ground troops. The grunts who are in the army. The grunts, the folk who are leading, they pop into town and pop out. But when they left town, they made the immediate future much harder for us.
Pop Joyner, I think those are some powerful points, and it makes me think about some of the work, Chuck, that you do. This is some of your area of research around the whole civil rights thing, right? Have you uncovered some of the what he called the grunt work, I guess you could say?
Yeah,
Pop Joyner
yeah, definitely. I mean, that's great, right? And that's exactly right. Because what we find is when we look at the grunt work, what we often find is that that's the origin of the actual work, right? You know, what we often find is, and we're reminded of the fact that, you know, for instance, when we take a look at Dr. King's life, the only movement that he is intimately sort of associated with from the ground up is Montgomery, right? Martin King doesn't start Birmingham. He doesn't start Albany. He doesn't start Atlanta. He doesn't start Greensboro. He doesn't start Chicago, right? So all of these other places where he goes in, he's that guy. He's that general, right? And that's not to take away from the work of Dr. King, right? Because that's one of the generals that got assassinated, right? That's one of the generals who lived the last 13 years of his life knowing that he was going to face death, right? So let's put that out front, right? But when we go back and look at the history, when we go back and look at what actually is happening in these places, that's when we peel back these narratives, right? That have been built up over these years that have glorified a very select group, generally of men, right? When we peel back these layers, that's when we look at and find this groundwork. That's when we go back and find these grunts living in Birmingham, living in Memphis, living in Chicago, living in Los Angeles, living all over the country. Folks who are building grassroots movements, right? Building movements one by one, street by street, block by block, until these movements are large enough for the people in these local areas to say, hey, yo, General, need you to come and bring your star power to this city, right? You know, and that's what we see, for instance, in Birmingham. King doesn't jump up one day and say, I shall go to Birmingham, right? Fred Shuttlesworth gets to say, yo, man, we're ready. We've been putting in work for the last decade, right? After Brown v. Board of Education, we've been putting in work for the last 9 years. We're ready for you to help take us over the top, right? So it's not about, you know, you coming in and being, it's not about you coming in and building anything. We here, right, have already built this, right? So that's a really powerful point.
Okay, I'm gonna jump with Zandria and God, and this is piggybacking off with the first question. Why is it that the generals get so much symbolism? One question that we have, one major topic, pretty much for this whole first segment is, first of all, is it necessary for Black Americans, or was it ever necessary for us to have some symbolic, you know, action figure that did it all for us? Because in essence, it's Dr. King and Barack Obama, and I'm wondering, why is this symbolism necessary? Is it necessary? And were they really symbols, or should, like my father said, should the grunts be the symbols? I guess we have to have it embodied in someone figure that might be charismatic, might have the charm, the looks, the rhetorical skills, anything it takes to be that symbol. So that's a question I want to start off. Zan or Gio, you can jump in.
I think that's the way we tell history anyway, not just Black people, but everybody needs to have like a one person. We tell stories about George Washington, and we tell stories about Abraham Lincoln. I mean, we just saw the Lincoln film where basically Lincoln by himself helped the freeze the slaves. So
Even as a vampire.
You can change anything about the narrative, but you're not going to bring the grunts into the conversation, because that's just not how memory works. And certainly later on, when we're thinking about framing collective memory, you can't do a statue to 80,000 people. You know, it's just like the Meredith statue down at the University of Mississippi. Of course, he was the first, but there were so many people kind of agitating for this move. So the problem is a function of how we choose to remember and commemorate things, and we just have to think about some new ways to remember history and new ways to kind of tell these stories that aren't focused on hero worship.
G, can I pitch this to you? Can I pitch this to you?
Mhm.
So if we're focusing on symbols, and in light of the patriarchal culture that we live in, what does this do for the legacy of the sisters who get left out because oftentimes they aren't the physical embodiment of the symbol that the people prescribe to?
I want to cover two things.
Please.
First, I want to go back to G's question that he posed. And one of the things that I like to bring up about that issue is, because part of the question is the allure or the idolatry of Obama. And that's exactly how he works his magic, so to speak. He always returns his sentiment back to the people. He always says, this doesn't work without you. So he's always in this dialogue with the grunts, letting them know that their work is important. Their work, if you ever get an email from Barack Obama, it always has in it, I am here because of you, or I am getting this because of you, or I need your support, or I know I can't do this without you. It always says that in every single communication that he puts out. So he actually does a great job of using the grunts, to further his mission. And of course, obviously, he is at the head, of the state. He's at the head of that movement. He's the figure that it's embodied in, but he actually utilizes that as a tool to, consistently even build his movement and build his message, and even now build part 2 of his presidency and his work post-presidency. He's already working on those things right now, saying, after I'm president, I still need you to do X, Y, and Z. I still need you to carry out this agenda. So I think that's one of the ways that it's very easy, not just in the large sense to say, oh, Obama's the first black president, let's put him up on a pedestal, but even on the actual work that he does and the people that he has to deal with, it's always him giving that power back to those people or giving that recognition back to those people. As far as the consequences of not addressing the issue of gender, then we all know that that's very problematic. That's part of how in the 70s and 80s we get this movement, this massive expression of African American women saying, these are our issues, we want these things addressed, this is going to be something that you have to address. So it's problematic in the sense that it is exclusionary, but it also spurs additional action. It spurs additional discussion. It spurs, a demand for inclusion.
Pop Joyner, you have something?
Yeah, I want to give a piece of this. Thank you. I ain't gonna take your water. I was gonna make an example out of this water. Now, you can't minimize the general either, because you got to have a general. Everybody aspires to be the general. The general is the face. Now, you got to remember this too. Somebody picked the general. Now, the general didn't make himself a general. Somebody higher or with more power than the general. Whether it's a war, civil war, presidency, let's talk about Obama.
You trying to say Obama was handpicked?
Well, he was elected, if nothing else.
Before
Now,
this?
well, let me go a little deeper. My son and I, we have this conversation all the time. And I say this, and I always say, we don't really elect the president. We choose between who they bring us.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, they say Obama raised $100 million by folk giving $5, $10 a piece. I've never met anybody that sent a dime to him.
Yes, you have.
What? Oh, you?
Yeah.
Okay, well, you the first one.
And that's really what it was, a
Wait,
dime.
wait,
No.
now-
Really, in hood terms, it was a nickel. I sent my $5, right?
Okay, now,
Told me to get a nickel bag.
many people, if this sign wasn't on this water, you wouldn't buy it. If they take this off and put it by the bottle that had this on it, you would probably buy this instead of the bottle with no sign. So we need a general. We need faces, because the general is always picked. They pick people who can articulate, who look strong. Most of them are tall. Most of them are nice looking, handsome men. They look good in their clothes. I'm describing Obama.
Do they look good without their clothes?
I've never seen it.
Right.
I've never seen it.
That signifies, bro.
Now, next point is this about women. Most men, if they are honest, most men just don't. They don't want women over them. Now we talking honesty now. Let's talk. Most men, if they'll be honest, now we do it back then in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. You got to understand, all women could do when I was coming up was teach school or be a nurse. And they didn't pay much money. School teachers didn't make a thing.
It was still
I used to be a accountant for McLean Trucking. We had more teachers, male teachers with master's degrees, hauling freight and loading trucks, than they quit school.
To try to make some more
Yeah,
money.
because they could make 3 times as much at the truck line than they could teaching school. All right? And back then, women didn't have jobs like they do now. You know, women didn't have their own companies, was over corporations, you know, president of this, president of that, president. It just wasn't done, black or white. And we don't talk about this much. White women were more discriminated. They were more enslaved than the black woman. My daddy told me, he was raised in Hernando, Mississippi, in east of Coldwater and west of Coldwater. And he said at night in Hernando and Coldwater, Mississippi, the only people who could be in town was the white man and the black woman. But now guess where the black man was when the white man was in town? He was at his house.
He was at the white man's house.
Was at
Look,
the white man's house.
this is what we're gonna do. On that note, we want to take a short break, get a chance to recalibrate, and I'm sure we're gonna pick this back up. But we got some other things that we want to deal with. Don't forget, you are checking out the pastor.
Professor.
Told you, righteous talk, real people. We'll be back in a second.